Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell, and today I want to talk about what I would do if I were given the run of DC Studios. The studio is currently reeling from the failure of Supergirl amid insider reports of significant creative differences during the editing process, and with the merger between Warner Brothers and Paramount seeming inevitable, DC's future is already a topic of heavy speculation. I've done a few of these videos, and they're usually about franchises or studios that have been around for a long time, but have hit some stumbling blocks. I did one for Marvel, I did one for Lucasfilm, and this is actually the second one I've done for DC. The first one was almost 4 years ago in the wake of the Warner Brothers Discovery merger, the cancellation of Batgirl, and the Flash's off-screen controversies. The DCEU didn't survive those turbulent times, which led to James Gunn and Peter Safran taking over and establishing DC Studios in late 2022 and unveiling their plans in early 2023. And frankly, it's wild that DC is already standing on the brink again with a brand new universe. So even though DC Studios has only been around for a few years, I thought that now would be as good a time as any to share what I would do if someone gave me the keys to the DCU kingdom to make some adjustments before things got even more dire than they already are.
The hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
So let's start with the first thing about DC Studios that I would change. Number one, James Gunn can be a creative or the boss, but not both. I'm going to make a few references to Marvel in the MCU in this video, but it's not because I prefer Marvel or I think that DC should be Marvel. It's simply because Marvel is the only studio to successfully construct the kind of interconnected universe that James Gunn and Peter Safran are attempting right now. One thing that Marvel nailed with Kevin Feige is having an executive who protects the overall franchise first. Feige keeps his eye on the big picture, offers creative course correction when necessary, and then steps back to let filmmakers handle the actual filmmaking. In other words, Kevin Feige is the boss, but he isn't also writing and directing The Avengers. That's exactly where James Gunn needs to be. He's a filmmaker at heart. I get it, and I like a lot of his movies, but he is also the co-chair of a studio division and the architect of an entire cinematic universe. He needs to be the big picture guy. I mean, look at the numbers. Out of the 4 DCU projects we've seen so far, Gunn has written and or directed 3 of them. That includes Peacemaker Season 2, which immediately muddled the timeline for general audiences because it was the lone element carried over from the dead DCEU, and Peacemaker came back, in my opinion, solely due to Gunn's personal involvement. I think that there are 2 main risks with Gunn playing both roles. The first is undesired uniformity. It risks making every single DCU project feel like a James Gunn film instead of allowing the universe to find its own footing. We already saw hints of that with Supergirl. James Gunn didn't write or direct it, but it did feel heavily indebted to his style. The second risk is, for lack of a better word, favoritism. The current lineup is incredibly Gunn-centric. The first 4 DCU movies consist of a James Gunn movie, a spin-off of a James Gunn movie, Clayface, and a James Gunn sequel. The first 3 TV shows are a Gunn-written animated series, a Gunn live-action series, and Lanterns, with a Jimmy Olsen spinoff, another Gunn-inspired project, reportedly close to production. Think about it this way. If Jon Favreau had been running Marvel in 2008 and 3 of the first 4 movies were Iron Man, War Machine, and Iron Man 2, paired with TV shows centered on Happy Hogan and Pepper Potts, you'd be well within your rights to question his objectivity regarding which projects get the green light. The biggest consequence, though, is that James Gunn's attention is constantly being split between making movies and running a studio. There is a reason why studio executives usually aren't movie directors, apart from the complete lack of creativity that most studio executives share. Making a movie is an intense, all-consuming process, and most directors will tell you that they don't really have time to do much else when they're in production. I love that James Gunn loves DC, but he has to pick a lane. He can either throw his full energy into being the creative head of the studio, or he can throw his full energy into making a bunch of DC projects. But his split focus and obvious passion for his own projects has gotten things off to a rocky start. DC needs a creative mastermind at the top, and Peter Safran isn't the answer. Safran is a highly successful producer. I mean, just look at what he did with the Conjuring universe and the first Aquaman. But he's a business-minded producer. He's not a narrative architect, and I don't think that he's in a position to look at a script and tell James Gunn, "No, we shouldn't do that." If Gunn wants to stay behind the camera, let him step down to a creative consultant role and bring in a dedicated studio head who matches his passion for the lore. To put it back in Marvel terms, James Gunn could be Jon Favreau or he can be Kevin Feige. He can't be both. Which potentially brings us to step 2, bring in one outsider with power. I'm in favor of decision makers at DC Studios being DC fans. You want that to ensure that the projects you're making feel authentic to the characters you're depicting. But I think the studio is speaking in a shorthand that audiences aren't responding to. Guardians of the Galaxy was, in my opinion, both the best and worst thing that ever happened to James Gunn. The best because it launched his career into the stratosphere, but the worst because I think it convinced him that he can sell any character to an audience, no matter how obscure. Whether Gunn decides to remain an executive or take a lead creative role, I would bring somebody in at the top level of leadership who isn't a DC superfan. This wouldn't be someone hired to sanitize or water down what DC makes. Instead, they would act as the first line of defense against becoming too insular. Think of The Empire Strikes Back and Lawrence Kasdan. He came in, worked inside the boundaries of George Lucas's universe, added his own perspective, and co-wrote what some people considered to be the best Star Wars movie ever made. And George Lucas's solo screenwriting ventures have shown that that outside perspective was probably effective. If a creator has to explain to a non-fan executive exactly who a character is and why a specific narrative hook works at the very beginning of development and is receptive to any feedback that they might receive, the studio may have to do far less explaining to the general public when marketing the actual movie. This dynamic shouldn't be hostile. It should be collaborative, with both sides open to feedback and willing to change their minds if they're skeptical about something. Rapidly greenlighting and making whatever obscure project that you love as a DC fan isn't a business model. These projects should be sold and explained to somebody before they're made, not after they fail. And an executive that's not as entrenched in DC lore would also help with my third point: focus. This ties directly into point number 1, and it's the primary reason, in my opinion, why the DCU is still struggling to establish its identity more than 3.5 years after its grand unveiling. Right now, DC seems to be running blindly down a dozen dark alleys all at once without focusing on the trajectory of the narrative as a whole. In early 2023, Gunn and Safran unveiled their first plans for the DCU, which they called Chapter 1, Gods and Monsters. Here's what they unveiled at the time, saying that this would be the order of release. Creature Commandos, which aired in late 2024 and still hasn't really tied back into anything. Waller, a Viola Davis Amanda Waller spinoff, which is still in development. Superman, which was the first DCU movie released last summer. Lanterns, which premieres next month on HBO Max, featuring 2 Green Lanterns. The Authority, which was canceled. Paradise Lost, a Themyscira political intrigue prequel show, which was canceled. The Brave and the Bold, DCU's introduction to Batman, which is still in development. Booster Gold, an animated show, which is still in development. Supergirl, which was moved up in the production order due to what Gunn dubbed its amazing script. We kind of know how that turned out. And Swamp Thing, which is still in development. In the time since that announcement, the plan has spun wildly out of control. A Clayface film was fast-tracked onto the schedule and will come out later this year. And on top of that, movies for Wonder Woman, the Teen Titans, and a Bane-Deathstroke team-up have been tossed onto the pile, alongside television shows for Mr. Miracle, Mr. Terrific, Blue Beetle, and that Jimmy Olsen spinoff. And into that mix, you can also throw in Peacemaker Season 2, which I've already mentioned, and The Batman Part 2, not part of the DCU, but under the DC Studios umbrella, which has faced multiple delays. There's development, and then there's wheel spinning. Right now, it feels like a distinctive lack of focus is resulting in a lot of wheel spinning, which makes adjusting to bumps in the road even harder. And how do you stop those wheels from spinning? Well, that leads us to step 4, pause development. I'm not saying cancel every project, but it's time to step back and reassess the big picture strategy. Is this really the moment to spend precious resources, time, and energy trying to crack a sitcom about Jimmy Olsen and Gorilla Grodd? I don't think so. Take 30 days, assemble a brain trust, prioritize and draw up a blueprint for what the new plan is, then focus on a handful of projects and get some real traction on them. The goal doesn't instantly have to be rushing toward a Justice League crossover. We know what happens there. But the strategy also can't be throwing a random group of characters at the wall to see what sticks. However, there is one major character that should be the focus of this reshuffling of priorities, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But first, I want to thank the sponsor for this video, Surfshark. If you know one thing about me, it's probably that my name is Dan Murrell. But if you know two things about me, it's that my favorite movie is Jaws. And that's why today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN, is a perfect fit. Much like the dark waters of the ocean, you never know what's lurking in the depths of the internet. But with Surfshark, you get one tool to protect all aspects of your life online. I spend a lot of time doing box office research online for the channel, and if I'm not connected to Surfshark, it seems like the same ads just keep following me around no matter where I go. That's because even if you're just browsing at home, every website you visit and every link you click leaves a digital footprint. With Surfshark VPN, my IP address is masked, making my online activity hard to track. And if you do a lot of online shopping, websites can track your activity to target you with ads and even give you different prices. Surfshark's ad blocker blocks those ads and trackers to help you get the best deal. Cybersecurity is a big deal, and the last thing you want is to be tracked, targeted, or even have your information stolen. With one easy-to-use app that covers all the devices in your household, Surfshark is here to make sure you can use the internet in peace without worrying about being stuck in the jaws of anyone who wants to track you. You can go right now to surfshark.com/Murrell and use the code Murrell to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN at checkout. That's surfshark.com/Murrell, Murrell, with the promo code Murrell to get 4 extra months at checkout. With Surfshark, you're going to need a bigger internet. So when you're launching a new DC universe, Superman makes sense as the first project out of the gate, but there's a character who I think is even more essential when it comes to success for the DC universe, and it's a character that also poses one of DC's biggest current question marks. And that brings us to step 5 of my plan. It's time to solve the Batman problem. There's a reason the MCU eventually made a deal with Sony to bring in Spider-Man. Peter Parker is Marvel's crown jewel. But let's say the Spider-Man deal was never made with Sony. Could the MCU have progressed without him? Well, although the universe wouldn't feel complete, I'd argue that yes, they could have done it without Spider-Man. But DC isn't the same. You cannot build a DC universe without a Batman. While Marvel has a variety of characters that have taken the spotlight over the years, DC, I would argue, has always revolved around the twin sons of Batman and Superman. Yes, DC does have a Batman right now in Robert Pattinson, but Matt Reeves clearly has zero desire to fold his vision into a wider cinematic universe, which is perfectly fine. We have 2 successful Spider-Man franchises currently running. But that second Batman franchise does need to get up and running. James Gunn has repeatedly stressed that he wants a deeply interconnected universe, and if that's the case, the studio needed to fix the Batman problem yesterday. We are over 3 years out from the initial DCU announcement, and the studio is still cycling through new writers for The Brave and the Bold. It's time to take Batman off the back burner, pour maximum resources into the project, and make him the studio's absolute top priority. And once that Batman project is actively in development, I would also impose limits on what's said publicly about that project and every DC project, because step 6 is manage expectations. James Gunn loves to do interviews and he loves to post on social media. I think he does it a little too much, but there is value to sharing behind-the-scenes photos or making major announcements regularly. Gunn himself said that he thinks his posts on Instagram are more valuable than doing a Hall H panel at Comic-Con, which is the kind of thing I think he should maybe say less of. But he especially has to take more care when he's hyping upcoming projects. When an executive publicly proclaims a project as one of the greatest scripts I've ever read or one of the best superhero movies ever, they're painting a massive target on that film's back. You're basically daring critics and audiences to find flaws. We saw this exact phenomenon play out with The Flash and again with Supergirl. It weaponizes expectations, making what might have been just a mediocre response look like a catastrophic failure. And when multiple projects don't match the expectations that you set, you create a credibility problem. By all means, say you're proud, say you're excited, but step back and let the audience decide if the movie is a masterpiece. Under my DC regime, there would be hard limits on what expectations we were setting for each project, and the projects that we were hyping would mostly be headed to the big screen, because step 7 is theatrical first, then TV. The pandemic-era philosophy that you can build a multi-billion-dollar franchise equally across theatrical features and streaming television is dead. How did forcing audiences to watch streaming shows to understand Sam Wilson's first days as Captain America, or find out who Ms. Marvel was, or see the introduction of Kang the Conqueror work out for the MCU? Streaming is a fantastic supplement, but it shouldn't be used as an essential building block. Look at The Penguin. It wasn't mandatory viewing to understand Matt Reeves' universe, but it did well because audiences loved the theatrical version of the character and wanted a spinoff, which HBO Max delivered. Since I'm not undoing anything currently in production, I'm not going to cancel Lanterns, but I am putting a future ban on introducing major characters on streaming first. Streaming shows should be a reward for a successful theatrical film, not a homework assignment required to understand the next movie. And generally, re-examining the streaming strategy is a small part of step 8, acknowledge reality. It is not 2014 or even 2019 anymore. The comic book movie boom is over. People won't just show up to a theater on opening weekend because it's a DC movie, and they won't show up just because I, as a studio head, love a character or a writer or director loves a character. There is another realistic test that every greenlight production has to pass, and that is, can we actually sell this to the casual moviegoer? It is ugly that money and art sometimes have to coexist like this, but they do. What was the market for Creature Commandos? It was the first DC Studios project, which James Gunn himself greenlit because he'd already written it. But what was the strategy there? Who watched it? It aired a year and a half ago, but have you heard anyone talk about it since then, outside of DC superfans? Hardcore fans should be respected, but they aren't a big enough audience to justify millions of dollars in investment before you've built a wider base. You have to expand the tent, then start to market the deep cuts once everybody's already in. When Marvel released Guardians of the Galaxy back in 2014, there was zero mainstream market for those characters, and to their credit, Marvel engineered a great rollout. They educated people, they cut good trailers, but more importantly, they positioned that film inside the MCU when it had an optimal chance to succeed, wedged between a consequential, game-changing Captain America movie and the second Avengers movie. Audiences bought tickets largely because they trusted the brand, and then they fell in love with the characters. Supergirl, by contrast, arrived as just the second film in a fragile new universe with little goodwill to lean on. She was sold as if she was a character that audiences already knew and loved, but that was based off of one 30-second cameo appearance in the first DCU movie. Is Supergirl a recognizable name? Sure, but she doesn't command the box office draw of some A-list heroes whose movies are currently gathering dust in development. Obviously, Supergirl's reviews didn't help the movie's case, but plenty of blandly received superhero movies have done well at the box office. However, most of those came out at a time when pretty much every comic book movie did well. DC tried to market a 2026 film using a 2018 playbook. And it's not just about marketing, the studio also has to face reality when it comes to budget. The age of routinely greenlighting $200 to $250 million superhero blockbusters is done. There is no automatic safety net for bloated productions anymore, and audiences have gotten more discerning. The global box office picture, especially, is different with China withdrawing from Hollywood films. Superman pulled in just over $618 million worldwide last summer, and it did a lot to win back fan enthusiasm, but even that result, when you pair it with the movie's $200 million plus production budget, meant that there was very little margin for error. And when a follow-up like Supergirl stumbles at a similarly massive price tag, it becomes a catastrophic, potentially studio-altering loss. Under my guidance at DC, we would institute strict budget controls over all of our projects. Not every movie needs to be a massive CGI spectacle, especially titles that carry more risk. Clayface is a step in the right direction, but that discipline needs to be expanded further. Rack up some wins, even if they're small ones, and mitigate potential damage from box office flops. Don't damage a director's ability to make a movie, but develop it with the understanding that there are limitations. The reality is that there's more competition and more noise than ever. I love passion and enthusiasm, but it has to meet the reality of marketing. What people are actually going to pay to see, and how many people are actually going to pay to see it. And so far, DC Studios has not acknowledged that reality. But I wouldn't be a good executive if I didn't lay out my own vision for where we go next. So, number 9, here are my priorities. Let's say all of this happens. We pause development and we have 30 days to set priorities for the future of DC Studios. Well, first of all, we're going to honor the current production pipeline. We're going to maintain the marketing push for Clayface, keep production steady on Man of Tomorrow, and give Matt Reeves whatever resources he needs to cross the finish line on the Batman Part 2. At the same time, as I've said, the absolute top priority becomes figuring out the mainline DCU Batman. If the Brave and the Bold concept isn't working, we push a little harder. If that doesn't work, we scrap it and we find a take that works. Or we even try to develop a second take in parallel with the Brave and the Bold and see what comes out on top. Simultaneous development on 2 takes of the same project isn't ideal and shouldn't be the norm, but Batman's importance necessitates doing things a little differently. Wonder Woman should also be a top priority. I know that Wonder Woman 1984 was a disappointment for a lot of people, but I think there's still a lot of gas left in the tank there, and she should be at the front of the development line. When it comes to Lanterns, like I said, I'm not going to burn the project. It violates my no streaming rule for major characters, but that doesn't mean it gets cast off entirely. I would also prioritize seeing what people respond the best to in that show and going down that road. If the Hal Jordan, Jon Stewart team up works, let's start developing a film based on that. If there's a clear audience favorite on the show, we'll lean in that direction. The HBO Max show basically gives DC a chance to do some very expensive but possibly effective audience research, so let's take advantage of that. So we have top priority on Batman, followed closely by Wonder Woman and developing a Green Lantern that audiences respond to. What about the many other projects in development? Well, let's get together and pick the 1 or 2 that we're most excited about and put our full energy into those projects. Is it the Bane and Deathstroke movie? Is it Teen Titans? Is it Swamp Thing? Whatever it is, let's pool our brain power together and make those projects even better, instead of spreading resources around a bunch of things that'll take forever to develop. As the head of the studio, I would keep an open mind, but you'd have to work really hard to convince me that now is the right time for a project based on Amanda Waller or Booster Gold or Jimmy Olsen or Mr. Miracle. But if what we have for Swamp Thing is in good shape and could be made at a reasonable price that would allow that vision to be executed, I wouldn't be deterred by the fact that he's not Aquaman or Shazam. Obviously, you can't do everything one at a time, so development could continue on other projects, just not as a co-equal priority with everything else. Once the main priorities are set and we have a few hits on our hands, things will hopefully be on much more solid ground, which will give us a little extra flexibility. By establishing strict priorities and executing them to the best of our ability, every single DC theatrical release stops being an existential make-or-break gamble for the studio. It's time to stop crossing our fingers and praying for the best, and start giving audiences a reason to trust DC again. So that's what I'd do if I ran DC. What would you do if you magically became the CEO? Let me know down in the comments below, and as always, stay tuned right here for the latest in movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.